Welcome, ladies, to our Sunday Bhagavatam discussion. Today we're reading from Canto 4, Chapter 8, texts 24 through 29. So let's begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. All right, we'll begin with text 24. The great sage Maitreya continued, the instruction of Dhruva Mahārāja's mother, Srimati, was actually meant for fulfilling his desired objective. Therefore, after deliberate consideration, and with intelligence and fixed determination, he left his father's house. The great sage Nārada overheard this news, and understanding all the activities of Dhruva Mahārāja, he was struck with wonder. He approached Dhruva, and touching the boy's head with his all-virtuous hand, he spoke as follows. How wonderful are the powerful kṣatriyas! They cannot tolerate even a slight infringement upon their prestige. Just imagine, this boy is only a small child, yet harsh words from his stepmother proved unbearable to him. The great sage Nārada told Dhruva, my dear boy, you are only a little boy whose attachment is to sports and other frivolities. Why are you so affected by words insulting your honor? My dear Dhruva, if you feel that your sense of honor has been insulted, you still have no cause for dissatisfaction. This kind of dissatisfaction is another feature of the illusory energy. Every living entity is controlled by his previous actions, and therefore there are various varieties of life for enjoying or suffering. The process of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very wonderful. One who is intelligent should accept that process and be satisfied with whatever comes, favorable or unfavorable, by his supreme will. Okay, so we will focus on text 24 today. Read the verse in the report. Maitreya uvacha evang sanjalpitang matur akarnyartha gamang vacha saniyam yatmanatmanam nishchakrama pituhurat. The great sage Maitreya continued, the instruction of Dhruva Mahārāja's mother Srimati was actually meant for fulfilling his desired objective. Therefore, after deliberate consideration and with intelligence and fixed determination, he left his father's house. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Both the mother and the son were lamenting Dhruva Mahārāja's having been insulted by his stepmother and his father's not having taken any step on this issue. But mere lamentation is useless. One should find out the means to mitigate one's lamentation. Thus, both mother and son decided to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord because that is the only solution to all material problems. It is indicated in this connection that Dhruva Mahārāja left his father's capital city to go to a secluded place to search out the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the instruction of Prahlāda Mahārāja also, that if one is seeking peace of mind, he should free himself from all contamination of family life and take shelter of the Supreme Godhead by going to the forest. To the Gaudiya Vaishnava, this forest is the forest of Vrinda or Vrindavan. If one takes shelter of Vrindavan under Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani, certainly all the problems of his life are solved very easily. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. I'll stop sharing now. What a beautiful purport, and apt since we are soon going to be celebrating Radhastami, or the appearance day of Radharani. And I was listening to one of Srila Prabhupada's addresses on Radhastami just this morning, and I'll share a little more about it later, but it was about 35 minutes long, and I think the first 25 minutes were just about, sort of practical aspects of practicing Krishna consciousness. I was like, I hope he talks about Radharani. But he did, it was nice. Okay, so the very last sentence of this purport says, if one takes shelter of Vrindavan, under Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani, certainly all the problems of his life are solved very easily. Wow. So Srila Prabhupada is giving us a claim here, an argument for the effectiveness of Krishna consciousness in solving all of our problems. That's right, all of them. And in this chapter of the Bhagavatam, we are reflecting on the unique problems that Dhruva Mahārāja is facing. And Dhruva is actually the great grandson of Lord Brahma. He is the grandson of one of the Manus, can't remember, Swayambhuva Manu, maybe. And so he's pretty much one of the, he's one of the first few generations of the creation of the universe, that's Dhruva. So to get this type of birth and this type of position, a soul has to be extremely advanced in their accumulation of merit. And they are gifted with very great powers as part of these, something that goes along with these kinds of exalted births. And so it's clear that these powerful beings also have some problems. And I think that's one of the interesting parts about the story of Dhruva. And there was a song that came out when I was a kid, maybe some of you will remember, probably not some of you, but it's a Notorious B.I.G. song called More Money, More Problems. Famous, yes, okay, great. So glad some of you get the reference. But basically the hook, the more money we come across, the more problems we see, right? And this song is actually based on a biblical proverb from 1 Timothy 6:10. The King James translation is, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." And so this song that I'm referencing is a song about the problems of success. And what are the problems of success? You can think of a few things come to mind, envy in particular, pride, various things. And in Dhruva's case, Dhruva has aroused the envy of his stepmother. His position as a son of the king has aroused the envy of his stepmother, and his pride is insulted. And we can see that because of Dhruva's pride, he can't bear the slightest insult. And Nārada Muni comments on this in verse 26. How wonderful are the powerful kṣatriyas. They cannot tolerate even a slight infringement upon their prestige. And I looked at this because I thought the word wonderful was interesting. And if you look at the Sanskrit, because sometimes Prabhupada speaks in a way that's a little bit old-fashioned. So when he says wonderful, it's not clear that he's saying it's a great thing. That's not obvious from the text. And if you look at the Sanskrit, the word is aho, A-H-O, aho, and it's just a particle. It means like alas, or like wow. So basically, it's not so much like, wow, that's so wonderful. It's more like, whoa, that is wild. Like, wow. Okay, just imagine this boy is only a small child, and yet harsh words from his stepmother proved unbearable to him, and he's leaving his house. He's leaving his family's house. He's 5 years old, and he's a prince. Like, everything's going to be fine if he stays in the house. Like, you know, he doesn't have to talk to his dad. He doesn't have to talk to his stepmom. They can arrange some, you know, they can arrange other activities. They can pretty much arrange whatever he wants. But no, he's not staying there. They insulted him. He's not staying there. And yeah, another interesting point is that the kṣatriyas, they're not really supposed to be as tolerant as the brahmanas. And so Nārada Muni is commenting on this characteristic of kṣatriyas. It's not that they're intolerant or they're uncontrolled or something, but they're supposed to be proactive in taking leadership, and particularly in stopping injustice. And you can see that if we read another line of the purport, both the mother and the son were lamenting Dhruva Mahārāja as having been insulted by his stepmother and his father's not having taken any step on this issue. So his father's the opposite. His father sees an insult to his son. He doesn't do anything. He's the king. He's the grandson of Brahma. He's like a really big, like very fancy king. Like they say king, but it's more like a ruler of the world or some, I don't know, galaxy or who knows. I don't know exactly what their property holdings are. But you can imagine that they're quite impressive. And no, the king just doesn't do anything. And so the whole problem here originates with the material attachments of the father, because his queen, it's his beautiful queen or his appealing queen. He has two wives, Srimati and Suruchi. So Suruchi is the one that's more attractive to him. And he's attracted to her in such a way that overcomes his judgment and that overcomes his ability to actually do his duty and act properly. So that's sort of the origin of the whole problem here. And so he's silent when his son is insulted. This is also a theme in the scriptures. You can see that in the Mahabharata, this happens as well, where the leaders are silent during the insult to Draupadi, and that basically marks them all as, basically after that point, they're marked for ruin, because that inability to speak up, that unwillingness to speak up and take action in the face of injustice, for people who have that responsibility, it's not, nothing good can come from that, not in the name of, peace or tolerance or whatever. So, next line of the purport, but mere lamentation is useless. One should find out the means to mitigate one's lamentation. So Prabhupada is pointing out a practicality which applies both to material life and spiritual life. As we know, Prabhupada was an eminently practical person, and so this framing is apt. It follows the theme of Dhruva's motivation too, which is a material motivation. And what I find interesting here is that even though Dhruva's problem is material, the fact that there is a Krishna conscious solution, there's a totally spiritual solution, it can kind of point us to understand that in material misery, there's an underlying existential poignancy there. So no matter how we're suffering or how some other person is suffering, whether they're conscious of Krishna or not, there is something much deeper going on. we are being kind of stimulated in a way to feel the ultimate, the unsatisfying nature of material life through our material sufferings. And let's see, next line. Thus, both mother and son decided to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, because that is the only solution to all material problems. And so we can't escape spiritual reality by engaging in life only on a superficial level. So if we constantly try to solve our problems in that way, it's not going to work. There's a deeper issue. Prabhupada talks about that in his introduction to the Bhagavatam, where he talks about the pinprick in civilization at large. Basically, like, we don't know the real nature of our problems. We don't know the real nature of our suffering. And so essentially, we can't fill the hole by just trying to improve our material situation. And to go back to that sense of like more money, more problems, or like striving to achieve success, there's an interesting study that gets kind of passed around the internet a little bit. And I meant to look it up and actually give you a reference for the study rather than telling you there's just a study on the internet, but whatever. I forgot to do that. But basically, the premise of this study is pretty amazing. But what it shows, at least through the methods that they used, is that there's a baseline of income, financial income, that creates a sense of satisfaction and happiness for people. And that basically is, let's say in an average US city, it's around $70,000. And so the idea there is, if you're familiar with, the cost of living in American cities, you can think, okay, well, there is a certain amount of money that's gonna make you comfortable enough to feel financially free. You won't be burdened. You won't be burdened. You won't be extremely limited in your choice of housing. You'll have some mobility. You'll be able to put away some money for savings. You'll feel abundant and your needs will be taken care of. But above that number, like if you think about it as a graph and like your satisfaction is going up as you make more money, once you get to that level, it just plateaus. Or it maybe doesn't rise as quickly or goes down in certain areas. Not exactly sure, but basically the rise does not continue. And I think that that is quite relevant to us, because we do actually need a certain amount of material stability and comfort to not be distracted by material issues constantly. But once those are satisfied, yeah, I mean, there's only so high you can like pour the whipped cream and like the cherries on top of the cake. Like, it's just a cake, like, So anyway, I thought that was relevant. I'll keep reading the purport. It is indicated in this connection that Dhruva Mahārāja left his father's capital city to go to a secluded place to search out the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the instruction of Prahlad Mahārāja also that if one is seeking peace of mind, he should free himself from all contamination of family life and take shelter of the Supreme Godhead by going to the forest. To the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, this forest is the forest of Vrinda or Vrindavan. So typically, to practice spiritual life, you need to get away from people who are demanding of your attention, people to whom you owe obligations in a material sense, who will be able to dictate your activities in a material direction. It's not that someone having a family connection with you is the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is you have obligations to them, which if you're in kind of an old-fashioned extended family environment, your family is going to make you very aware of your obligations to them. And if they're not spiritually inclined, then you're not going to have much time for that either. So that's the reason for leaving and going to a secluded place. But for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, or in the line of Chaitanya, or focusing on the worship of Radha and Krishna, I think this line is so beautiful where Prabhupada says that this forest is the forest of Vrindavan. You know, because it's the total opposite. Like when you go to the forest as an austere sage or yogi, it's barren, you know, you're leaving everything. And then if you just think of, actually, you're going to the forest of Vrindavan, you're going to the most opulent, charming, lovely, sweetest place. And ultimately it has the same effect and an even more powerful effect. And so we know in Krishna consciousness, there's this sense of yukta vairagya. So if your family is Krishna conscious or they allow you to practice, there's no particular need to leave your family, because that's not the point. The point is to get closer with Krishna. So the point of going to the forest is not to be austere. The point is to be able to be with Krishna. So the forest of Vrindavan is the most perfect place to do that. And it's also a relief because it's a much more moderate experience for the material body and mind, if you still are entangled with that, to not have to perform severe austerity, but only to have to use your natural propensities to serve Krishna. And then the last line, if one takes shelter of Vrindavan under Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani, certainly all the problems of his life are solved very easily. Yeah, so I'll return to what I was listening to this morning in Srila Prabhupada's Radhastami address. It was in London, I think. Can't remember what year. But yeah, basically, finally toward the end, I mean, at first he was talking about acts of charity and sacrifice and the stages of life. So that's all important too. And that does tie in with the Dhruva story, actually, because Dhruva is going to perform sacrifice for Krishna. We do that in a different way. We perform Sankirtan Yagya. That's our Yagya for our age. That's our specific process, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra coming from our lineage in the line of Lord Chaitanya. That's the prescribed action for us. And then in terms of serving Radharani, what we're doing is we're trying to offer something to Krishna. But of course, we know we don't offer directly to Krishna. Prabhupada says, don't offer a flower directly to Krishna, offer it to Radharani. Because he says, Krishna is Radharani's property. And we know that's through the power of love that there's that relationship, that there's that connection, there's that sense of being completely consumed and absorbed and surrendered. And so Radha and Krishna are completely surrendered to each other, and we're trying to just take part in that. And so Krishna is pleased through Radharani when we are presenting our offerings, whatever they may be, our acts of charity, sacrifice, our small austerities, our small acts of surrender. And through that, we tap into the potency of Radharani. Radharani is Krishna's pleasure potency. And so there's no danger of being dissatisfied. There's no danger of feeling that something is missing, that we didn't get all that we really wanted, because we're tapping into and we're serving and absorbing ourselves in the essential pleasure principle that the entire universe is based on. So that's very deep, and thank you all for listening. I think perhaps instead of a journal question, we can just reflect a little bit on the mercy of Radharani and how that has shown up in our lives. Yeah, because we'll be celebrating Radhastami soon, so we can get a head start. Thanks, everyone.